The thought of an ending, especially one whispered rather than declared, moves like a faint breeze through a silent room, soft, nearly unnoticed, yet it alters the air all the same. When we speak of something as vast and iconic as NASA approaching an end, we don't imagine explosions or final broadcasts. Instead, we imagine a slow dimming, a gentle retreat of footsteps down a long hallway. This prelude is not a warning, nor is it a proclamation. It is the faint realization that even the brightest chapters in the human story eventually begin to taper, not with fear, but with a soft exhale that carries both memory and wonder across time. In those quiet spaces where history and imagination meet, the idea of NASA's end becomes less of a collapse and more of a transition. It's like watching an old star gradually drift into its twilight phase, still warm, still present, still shaping everything around it, yet moving toward a different kind of existence. You can almost feel the weight of its decades, the triumphs, the risks, the people whose sleepless nights and steady hands pushed humanity beyond the cradle of Earth, gently settling like dust on forgotten control panels. It isn't sadness, it's the serenity of understanding that nothing luminous fades without leaving a glow behind. As you let the thought unfold slowly, you begin to sense how endings in great institutions do not arrive abruptly. They come in small signs: quieter rooms, older equipment, fewer missions planned, shifts in funding priorities that tilt attention away from the stars and back to the immediate world below. NASA's potential ending, whispered across time, feels like watching the tide pull away from the shore, subtle, rhythmic, and inevitable, yet full of meaning for those who once stood barefoot on the sands of exploration and felt the waves of possibility wash against their skin. Each gentle change feels like a leaf falling from a tall tree, individually insignificant, but collectively signaling the season shifting. There is a sweetness to it, a kind of surrender that carries dignity rather than despair. NASA's prelude to an ending may be filled with contemplation, quiet rooms where once screens glowed with the colors of distant galaxies. The hum of machines slows, the conversations soften, and the focus of a world once united by curiosity slowly turns elsewhere. You can almost hear the silence growing, not oppressive but tender, like a blanket laid over memories that will remain forever warm beneath its folds. And in thinking about this silent retreat, you find yourself drifting into a calm rhythm, as though NASA itself is exhaling after decades of holding its breath while reaching toward the unknown. It becomes clear that the concept of the end is not about disappearance, it is about transformation. It is a gentle hand closing one book so another may be opened. It is the slow extinguishing of a lamp because dawn is beginning to rise somewhere else. As these thoughts settle, they invite you to sink deeper into reflection, letting the notion of an ending guide you not toward fear but toward serenity and acceptance. The soothing nature of such an ending lies in understanding that the legacy of NASA doesn't evaporate, it simply shifts into the quiet corners of human memory where great stories rest. Imagining these last chapters feels like walking through an empty observatory at dusk. The instruments stand still, the domed ceiling echoes faint footsteps, and through the open slit above, the sky glimmers in silent familiarity. The universe does not mourn, it waits patiently, knowing that curiosity finds new vessels, new names, new hearts willing to reach upward. NASA's end is just a turning page in the cosmic diary we've been writing since we first looked up. As you breathe deeper into this unfolding sleep story, the pace naturally slows, the air thickens with a peaceful weight, and even the stars in your imagination seem to dim slightly, not out of loss but out of reverence. NASA's quiet ending becomes a gentle lullaby, reminding you that human achievement is like a constellation, its shape persists long after the individual stars fade from view. The glow of Apollo, the whisper of Voyager, the shimmering reflection of Hubble, they are all still drifting, still shining, even as the institution that birthed them grows older. The more you reflect on this prelude, the more you feel how endings align with the soft rhythm of nightfall. There is no sharp edge, no final bang, only a long, warm stretch of twilight that gradually wraps itself around the horizon of history. NASA's story settles into this dusk with grace, the way a grand ship slowly lowers its sails after crossing oceans that once seemed impossible. The wind quiets, the waves soften, and all that remains is the memory of movement, the echo of discovery, and the promise that new journeys will learn from its wake. Let your breathing fall into sync with this slowing narrative, for NASA's imagined ending is not a collapse but a gentle folding, like a well-worn map being set aside after years of guiding wanderers across uncharted paths. In that folding lies gratitude, not grief. Every crease in the map tells of missions brimming with hope. Every faint line holds thousands of hands that worked together. As the map is placed down, it does not lose meaning. Instead, it becomes an artifact of wonder, ready to soothe anyone who picks it up with the memory of where humanity once dared to go. The world changes, priorities shift, and perhaps, in this imagined version of the future, humanity has begun to transition exploration to other agencies, private ventures, or entirely new forms of discovery. NASA's quiet end blends seamlessly into this evolution, like a wise elder whose stories continue to guide younger generations even after their voice grows faint. They no longer lead the journey, but without them, the path would never have existed. There is a calm, almost sacred beauty in that realization. And so, as this prelude deepens, the idea of NASA's final years becomes like a dim corridor lined with golden photographs, some slightly faded, some still vibrant. Each image captures a moment when Earth reached beyond itself, footprints on grey dust, a distant pale blue dot floating in darkness, the stormy bands of Jupiter glowing under a mechanical eye. Passing through this corridor feels like walking through a museum after hours, where every memory stands still and the silence is warm, gentle, and comforting. This imagined ending does not ask you to mourn but to rest. It invites you to imagine the soft hum of an old mission control room falling silent one last time, not with sadness but with satisfaction. The screens flicker, then fade. The chairs sit empty, yet the room holds the ghosts of laughter, tension, triumph, and quiet disbelief at the universe's beauty. In this silence, you sense the profound human spirit that made it all possible, still alive, still glowing, even as the era itself comes to a close. Letting your thoughts drift deeper, you begin to see how the universe remains the same, serene, vast, patient, while humanity reshapes how it explores. NASA was a vessel for curiosity, but curiosity itself is eternal. This ending is merely a soft shift, like a lantern being passed from one traveler to another. The flame remains bright, though the hands that carry it change. The night around you feels wider, calmer, as if the cosmos is watching over this transition with infinite understanding. As your mind drifts further, the image becomes dreamlike, NASA standing at the edge of a long journey, looking back at the footprints it has left across decades. These footprints do not erase with time, they imprint themselves into the collective soul of humankind. Even as the steps grow slower, gentler, more deliberate, the path continues to shine faintly behind them, guiding future dreamers who will walk their own roads across the dark. The ending feels almost like the final notes of a long symphony, soft, fading, yet resonant in the air long after the instruments rest. NASA's melody, filled with courage and wonder, does not cease to exist. It simply becomes part of the background music of human history, a quiet harmony that continues to soothe those who remember how boldly humanity once reached into the abyss and found beauty waiting. In this slow, lulling journey through the idea of NASA's twilight, you begin to feel the comfort of inevitability. NASA has always been a bridge, a connection between what we know and what we long to understand. Eventually, all bridges weather, but the rivers they help us cross remain open, inviting new explorers to build new paths. This realization eases your mind, settling you into a warm, dreamy calm. Your thoughts wander to distant probes still drifting silently through interstellar space, carrying NASA's final whispers long after its imagined ending. Voyager, with its golden record, becomes a tiny ambassador of a bygone institution, floating peacefully through the darkness like a message in a cosmic bottle. NASA may rest, but its creations sail on, cradled by the stars. The prelude now deepens into something almost meditative. You envision Earth spinning quietly, its nights filled with memories of rockets rising against the sky. People look up, perhaps no longer seeing NASA-led missions, but still feeling the ancient pull of curiosity. NASA's end does not darken the sky, it simply becomes one of many stories written into its constellations. As you breathe slower, the idea becomes soothing rather than sorrowful. NASA's withdrawal is like an elder retiring after a lifetime of service, having accomplished what once seemed impossible. There is peace in stepping back, in allowing new generations of thinkers and explorers to rise. The universe is vast, and there will always be room for new dreamers to leave their marks among the stars. The more your mind sinks into this narrative, the more NASA's quiet end feels like dusk settling over a familiar landscape. The colors dim gently, the wind softens, the world becomes still. And in that stillness, gratitude fills the air like a soft glow. Gratitude for the journeys made, the discoveries earned, the dreams ignited. The night is not empty, it is full of echoes. And so you arrive at the final moments of this prelude, drifting deeper into calm. NASA's imagined end is not a door closing but a light slowly dimming, leaving behind a trail of warmth that lingers long after the bulb grows quiet. The universe hums softly, the stars blink in gentle reassurance, and you are left with a serene understanding. Endings, when viewed with compassion, are simply the universe's way of making room for new beginnings. NASA's story begins not with a sudden burst of brilliance, but with a slow gathering of intentions, ideas, and hopes that were quietly forming even before the agency had a name. It emerged from a world that had just learned how powerful flight could be, a world that had witnessed both awe and fear in the skies. To imagine NASA's roots is to imagine a seed planted in the soil of human curiosity, one that sprouted not overnight, but through seasons of effort, uncertainty, and an unspoken longing to rise above the familiar clouds that had defined human limits for centuries. Its rhythm started with the gentle footsteps of early thinkers, people who watched the sky not as an unreachable ceiling but as an invitation. Before NASA existed, long before rockets left their trails across the dawn, there were dreamers sketching impossible ideas on scraps of paper, engineers bending metal into shapes no one had named yet, and scientists staring through telescopes wondering what mysteries hid between those tiny points of light. NASA grew from that timeless question, the one whispered by every child who has ever looked up at night: what else is out there? When NASA finally came into being, its birth wasn't dramatic, it was administrative, official, almost plain. Yet behind the paperwork lay a trembling excitement, a collective heartbeat ready to accelerate into a new era. The world around it was tense, competitive, driven by urgency, but NASA's internal rhythm was different, calmer, more methodical, listening to the pulse of discovery rather than the ticking clock of politics. Its roots were patient because science itself is patient, and even in moments of rapid development, the agency held on to that steady, thoughtful pace. As the years unfolded, NASA learned to stretch its reach with careful hands. Early missions were tiny steps, like a child testing the strength of its legs. Data came slowly, often as a few scattered numbers printed onto long strips of paper. Those numbers were precious, each one a thread in a tapestry that would take decades to weave. NASA's rhythm was one of repetition and refinement: launch, observe, adjust, try again, each cycle building a little more trust between humanity and the vast unknown that surrounded it. The agency's roots dug deeper as it ventured from atmosphere to orbit. Project Mercury, then Gemini, then Apollo, each one added a new layer to the quiet cadence of progress. Every mission required calm minds working through storms of complexity, every success born from nights of patient calculation, every failure met with thoughtful resolve. This rhythm was not fast or reckless, It was measured, careful, almost meditative, shaped by the understanding that space was beautiful but unforgiving. NASA's early decades carried a sense of rising motion, like a heartbeat gaining strength with each accomplishment. The moon landings were the brightest notes in this long, unfolding song, but even they were not rushed, they were the culmination of years spent solving tiny problems one breath at a time. Behind the global excitement, behind the televised moments and triumphant radio calls, there was a quiet, steady drumbeat of engineers, scientists, and astronauts breathing through each challenge with extraordinary calm. That quiet rhythm shaped NASA's soul. After Apollo, the agency shifted into a new era, one defined not by the race to beat rivals, but by the desire to understand the cosmos with patience rather than urgency. Space stations began to take shape, orbiters studied planets from afar, and telescopes unfolded their mirrors to catch ancient light drifting through the universe. NASA's history in this era feels like a deep inhale after the wild sprint of the space race, a transition from adrenaline to contemplation. Its rhythm slowed, softened, became more reflective. The space shuttle became another symbol of NASA's evolving tempo, part machine, part home, part companion in the long dance between Earth and the stars. Its missions repeated like a heartbeat, each launch familiar yet extraordinary. With every ascent and descent, NASA reinforced its identity through routine bravery, showing that the extraordinary could become almost ritual. When handled with care, even tragedies, though heartbreaking, were met with the same steady resolve that defined its roots: pause, learn, rebuild, continue. NASA's history is dotted with quiet triumphs that rarely make headlines: small instruments tested, tiny spacecraft launched, decades-long missions maintained with gentle adjustments across unimaginable distances. These subtle victories shaped its character even more than the iconic moments. Like an old tree, NASA grew through countless small rings, each one representing a year of work that may not have seemed monumental at the time but contributed to a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of human dreams. The agency's rhythm deepened as robotic explorers ventured farther than any human ever had. Mariners, pioneers, voyagers, they carried NASA's patience into the outer darkness, moving slowly, faithfully, through the solar system. These missions were not hurried, they drifted at a pace set by gravity and physics, a pace NASA accepted with serenity. Waiting years for a spacecraft to reach its destination became part of the agency's identity. Patience wasn't a burden, it was the very language of exploration. Then came the telescopes. Hubble, with its shimmering view of galaxies, nebulae, and cosmic dust, added a new tempo to NASA's history, one that felt like watching the universe breathe. Each image took time to capture, time to process, time to understand. But the world waited alongside NASA, learning through those delays that beauty often arrives slowly. The agency taught humanity how to appreciate discovery at a deliberate pace, as though revealing the universe through a slowly opening curtain. NASA's roots sank even deeper during periods of uncertainty, budget cuts, and shifting national priorities. These were not dramatic collapses but slowdowns that tested the agency's resilience. And yet, through each dip in momentum, the rhythm continued: quiet planning, steady progress, long-term projects that remained untouched by the noise of politics. NASA learned to survive in silence, drawing strength from its history and the unwavering curiosity of those who believed in its mission. As international cooperation grew, NASA's rhythm intertwined with others, forming a global dance of shared ambitions. The International Space Station became a symbol of harmony, orbiting gently above a world often divided. Months turned into years, years into decades, and the station remained, circling Earth in a calm, consistent loop, its motion echoing NASA's own patient pulse. Collaboration became part of the agency's deeper roots, reinforcing its identity with the warmth of shared purpose. The agency's history is not just technological, it is human. It is filled with faces that worked quietly behind consoles, scribbled equations in dim rooms, repaired machinery under pressure, or stared at screens waiting for a signal from a distant probe. These individuals, often unseen, formed the steady heartbeat of NASA. Their devotion, their calm under pressure, their willingness to spend years on a single project, are threads woven into the agency's enduring rhythm. NASA's long story has always balanced ambition with humility. It understood early on that space is vast, that the universe is ancient, and that humanity must move gently within it. This humility shaped the agency's tempo, each step taken with respect, each discovery approached with wonder, each mission designed to listen as much as it sought answers. It was never about conquering space, it was about learning from it, moving through it as one might move through a sacred place. Through countless missions, NASA's roots grew into the public imagination. It became a symbol not just of exploration but of patience rewarded. People followed its stories not because they were fast or sensational, but because they embodied dedication, care, and a quiet determination to expand the boundaries of understanding. The agency became a steady presence in an ever-changing world, a reminder that some pursuits require time, trust, and the courage to continue even when progress feels invisible. Even in the modern era, with rapid innovation and increasing competition, NASA's rhythm remains distinct. Others may move faster, push harder, seek immediate results. But NASA's roots hold it to a deeper pace, one guided by precision, safety, and a profound respect for the unknown. This slow, deliberate approach has allowed it to achieve things that require not speed, but endurance, studying distant worlds, waiting decades for signal returns, maintaining missions that span generations. Every rover that touched Martian soil echoed this steady rhythm, slow wheels turning across ancient dust, careful steps programmed by teams who worked tirelessly, yet patiently, to guide them. Each Martian sunrise captured by those rovers feels like a continuation of NASA's heartbeat, a quiet reminder that exploration does not rush, it unfolds. The agency's history is filled with these moments, small, gentle, but profoundly meaningful in the long narrative of human curiosity. The agency's rhythm carried into the exploration of the outer planets, Saturn's rings shimmering under Cassini's gaze, Jupiter's storms swirling in Juno's slowly collected data. Each mission took years simply to arrive, and more years to study their worlds. This willingness to wait, to observe, to savor the slow unraveling of knowledge, defines NASA's story more deeply than any single mission ever could. It is the poetry of patience written across the cosmos. NASA's history became richer as newer instruments, more delicate and precise, allowed humanity to see farther than ever before. Even modern telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope follow that same rhythm, slow unfolding, slow calibrating, slow revealing of cosmic secrets. NASA, even in this advanced age, remains loyal to the methodical pace that shaped its earliest years. Its roots keep it grounded, even as its gaze reaches across billions of light-years. And so, NASA's long, patient history forms a gentle arc across time, a quiet evolution marked not by sudden leaps but by steady, thoughtful steps. Its roots anchor it deeply in decades of experience, and its rhythm carries into the present like a calm, reassuring pulse. This history is not noisy or rushed, it is soothing, deliberate, and profoundly human, shaped by those who understood that some of the most important journeys are taken one slow, careful moment at a time. The story of NASA's fiscal tide begins with a gentle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere surrounding the agency, an environment shaped not by rockets or research, but by numbers on paper, quiet meetings behind closed doors, and the subtle weight of priorities that evolve with changing times. Budgets rarely announce themselves loudly. Instead, they whisper their influence through reduced schedules, postponed missions, and long stretches of waiting. NASA has always lived under this tide, rising and falling with the currents of national interest, economic pressures, and the delicate balance between ambition and affordability. Over decades, The ebb and flow of funding became almost like the rhythm of an old shoreline, washing against NASA's foundations with predictable uncertainty. When the tide was high, imagination expanded, missions multiplied, and bold ideas were allowed to breathe. When the tide retreated, the agency felt its edges tighten, projects were trimmed. Timelines stretched thin, and dreams deferred to some quiet corner of the future. These financial seasons shaped NASA's behavior as profoundly as gravity shapes the orbit of a satellite, guiding it gently yet firmly toward what was possible rather than what was ideal. As the years passed, each budget cycle acted like a long inhale and exhale of national attention. Some administrations leaned into exploration, widening NASA's horizon with renewed enthusiasm. Others tightened the belt, redirecting funds toward immediate concerns and leaving the agency to navigate the gentle haze of limitation. NASA learned to adapt gracefully, understanding that money itself was a kind of silent partner in every mission, its presence empowering boldness, its absence encouraging restraint. This delicate balance became a quiet art form within the agency's halls. Inside NASA's planning rooms, the fiscal tide influenced every decision, from the smallest instrument design to the most ambitious interplanetary mission. Engineers and scientists learned to think not only in terms of physics and possibility, but in terms of cost curves, estimated returns, and the emotional temperament of lawmakers who held the purse strings. These constraints became an invisible architecture, shaping the outlines of every path forward. It was a slow, systematic shaping, a guiding force that never rushed but always insisted on being felt. The most profound aspect of this fiscal tide was its subtlety. Unlike rockets blazing into the sky, budget cuts arrived quietly, through lines of text in thick documents, or the soft, resigned tone of an announcement that a project would be delayed. NASA adapted with patience, treating constraints not as barriers but as companions in the long, intricate dance of exploration. Each limitation required creativity, innovation, and sometimes gentle letting go. It was a tender, almost melancholic rhythm, one that encouraged the agency to dream carefully. Some years were graced with unexpected generosity, allowing NASA to unfold new missions like blossoms opening in the first warm days of spring. In those moments, optimism filled its corridors, and even the stars seemed a little closer, a little more welcoming. Yet even during these periods of abundance, the agency remained mindful of the tide's inevitable retreat. NASA learned to savor the fullness while preparing for scarcity, a quiet wisdom formed over decades of fluctuating financial support. The fiscal tide also influenced public perception. When budgets thinned, NASA's visibility waned, its achievements overshadowed by more immediate earthly concerns. The agency's work continued, steady and focused, but with less celebration, fewer press conferences, fewer moments when the world looked up in collective wonder. This quieting was not dramatic, it was gentle, subtle, almost like dust settling over a once busy room. NASA continued to breathe in the absence of applause, relying on its enduring sense of purpose to sustain its momentum. Within the agency, budget constraints shaped careers and hopes. Younger scientists often waited years to see their projects funded, learning patience as the first language of their profession. Veteran engineers carried the weight of abandoned concepts, ideas that might have transformed exploration but were softly shelved due to shifting priorities. These quiet disappointments never erupted into anger, they settled into a kind of serene acceptance, an understanding that progress is not just measured in successes, but in the strength to continue despite setbacks. The fiscal tide also changed NASA's internal culture. As funding became more uncertain, collaboration within teams deepened. People leaned on each other more fully, sharing burdens, solving problems creatively, and building a kind of quiet resilience that permeated every department. This unity was soft-spoken but powerful, like a group of travelers walking together through a long winter, finding warmth not in the weather, but in companionship and steady determination. As years unfolded, NASA faced growing competition from private companies and international agencies, each moving with their own fiscal rhythms. Some private firms surged ahead with bold investments, unburdened by political cycles, while NASA continued its steady walk through the shifting tides. This contrast sharpened the sense of constraint within the agency, but it also highlighted NASA's unique strength, its ability to persevere with dignity, even when resources thinned. Its slow, careful approach became a kind of anchor in a chaotic sea of rapid innovation. And yet, NASA's fiscal challenges were never absolute. Even in times of scarcity, the agency found ways to nurture its most essential missions, sustaining decades-long projects with quiet devotion. Like tending a garden in a drought, NASA learned to allocate resources gently, prioritizing what must survive while accepting that some seeds would not bloom. This delicate stewardship became part of its identity, a quiet acknowledgement that the universe waits patiently for those who move with care. The tide also influenced NASA's storytelling. During lean years, communication became even more important, sharing discoveries in ways that reminded the public why exploration mattered. These stories were not flashy, they were soft, thoughtful, filled with wonder. NASA learned that even when budgets shrank, imagination could still expand, and that sometimes a single image, a pale blue dot, a Martian sunset, a glimpse of ancient starlight, could restore faith in exploration more effectively than any funding cycle. Inside mission control rooms, the fiscal tide echoed in the background, a quiet reminder that every decision carried weight beyond engineering. Teams learned to stretch resources, reuse components, and design instruments that could do more with less. This ingenuity became a quiet point of pride, a testament to NASA's ability to thrive not in abundance, but in careful stewardship. Constraints sharpened creativity, turning obstacles into opportunities for elegant solutions. The ebbing tide also encouraged NASA to form deeper partnerships with other nations and private companies. These collaborations were born not from weakness, but from a growing understanding that exploration was too vast for any one agency to carry alone. The fiscal tide pushed NASA toward a more interconnected future, one where shared dreams outweighed individual ambitions. Through this cooperation, the agency found stability amid uncertainty, building bridges that softened the sting of financial limitations. Over time, the fiscal tide subtly redefined NASA's priorities. Grand visions of distant colonies and monumental missions were replaced with quieter goals, more focused studies, more sustainable technologies, more gradual progress. This shift did not diminish the agency's spirit, it merely changed its tempo. NASA moved from bold leaps to gentle steps, each one intentional, each one holding the quiet assurance that even slow progress brings humanity closer to understanding the cosmos. The constraints also encouraged introspection. NASA began to evaluate not just what it wanted to achieve, but why. It rediscovered the beauty of small missions, the elegance of precise observations, the power of patient science. In this reflective space, the agency found a new kind of purpose, less about spectacle and more about quiet truth-seeking, the kind that unfolds across decades rather than moments. The fiscal tide became a teacher, guiding NASA toward a calmer, more contemplative phase. As the tide continued across generations, NASA's resilience became unmistakable. Even when budgets fell to their lowest points, the agency endured with grace, adapting without losing its soul. Its history became proof that perseverance can outlast scarcity, that dedication can weather political storms, and that curiosity can thrive even in the shadows of limitation. This quiet endurance became one of NASA's most profound qualities, an invisible strength woven through every mission. With each cycle of funding and withholding, NASA learned new lessons about patience. Its employees understood that exploration was not a single sweeping gesture, but a series of carefully placed stones across an unknown river. Budget constraints did not stop the journey, they simply paused it, giving teams time to rethink, refine, and rediscover the wonder that kept them moving. These pauses, though sometimes frustrating, often led to deeper insights and wiser designs. The fiscal tide also shaped NASA's relationship with time itself. Missions planned across decades required unwavering dedication, even when funding dipped midway. Scientists learned to think in longer arcs, accepting that they might not see their work completed, trusting future hands to carry the torch forward. This long, generational perspective softened the impact of financial uncertainty, reminding everyone involved that exploration is a relay, not a sprint. Even in the face of financial pressure, NASA's sense of identity remained strong. The agency held on to its core values: curiosity, precision, responsibility, and awe. These values existed beyond budgets, beyond political shifts, beyond the changing winds of national focus. They were constants in the agency's heartbeat, grounding it through every tide. Money could influence NASA's direction, but it could never erase its spirit. And now, in imagining the quiet end of NASA, the fiscal tide becomes even more significant. It is not a dramatic collapse, but a slow, gentle retreat, a long series of narrowed budgets, paused missions, and shifting priorities that gradually soften the agency's presence. The end, if it ever comes, will arrive not with alarm, but with the soft closing of a book long read and deeply cherished. It will be the natural outcome of a tide that has ebbed for too many years without rising again. Yet even in this imagined twilight, NASA's essence remains. Its history, shaped by decades of financial waves, becomes a reminder that exploration survives not through abundance, but through resilience. The fiscal tide may retreat, but the inspiration NASA created will continue to ripple outward through the generations, quiet, steady, and everlasting. Leadership within a sprawling governmental agency rarely resembles a steady lantern held aloft. It behaves more like a wandering lighthouse beam, sweeping across priorities depending on who is turning the crank. Over decades, political guidance has continuously shifted NASA's horizon line, stretching and shrinking its ambitions according to the philosophies and anxieties of successive administrations. Each transition brings its own flavor of certainty and doubt, reshaping how missions are framed, funded, and justified. These shifts act not as storms that obliterate, but as tides that subtly reshape the contours of long-term planning, forcing the agency to adapt even when its goals appear fixed from the outside. Political leadership seldom concerns itself with celestial mechanics, yet its influence is woven into every orbital calculation and rocket test schedule. A new president or influential committee chair can redirect the organization simply by rephrasing its mandate. The space agency has lived through eras of bold vision followed by stretches of utilitarian restraint, each swing leaving behind a sediment of policy that later teams must either excavate or build upon. Such conditions foster a peculiar resilience. Engineers and administrators learn to design programs with multiple layers of contingency, knowing that the sky above their budgets may brighten or darken with each election cycle. The environment becomes a laboratory of adaptation, even when the science aims for permanence. Political weather often drifts in subtle forms long before any official change in leadership takes place. Shifts in public rhetoric, emerging geopolitical narratives, or fluctuations in media sentiment can prefigure adjustments in congressional priorities. Agency planners must read such signs like seasoned sailors scanning cloud formations, sensing momentum before it fully materializes. These undercurrents can alter not just funding levels but the tone of internal discussions, what risks are tolerable, which timelines are realistic, and which programs might need early defense against possible scrutiny. It becomes an exercise in forecasting, even when the storms are metaphorical. When administrations switch, they often bring competing philosophies about exploration, innovation, and national prestige. Some argue that space should serve immediate practical needs such as weather monitoring and communications infrastructure. Others favor grand exploration, imagining lunar return strategies or ambitious journeys to Mars. Each standpoint carries its own constellation of budgetary expectations and political calculations. Within the agency, this creates a constant balancing act, honoring the scientific community's long-range aspirations while ensuring that today's leadership feels heard, respected, and aligned with the chosen trajectory. Harmony is not guaranteed, yet its pursuit shapes the internal culture of the organization. Political winds do not merely blow from a single direction, they swirl through committees, appropriations subgroups, oversight bodies, and advisory councils. Each node in this network applies pressure, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully, often contradicting one another. Navigating such a maze is as complex as plotting a spacecraft through a system of gravitational slingshots. The key difference is that celestial bodies follow predictable rules, while political actors shift positions in response to new priorities, public debates, or personal alliances. Nevertheless, the agency has learned to maneuver through these intertwined expectations, steadily refining an institutional muscle memory for compromise and adjustment. A curious paradox emerges within this political weather system. Even as leadership changes regularly, a sense of continuity must somehow persist, or long-term projects, those that span decades, would crumble under shifting mandates. Career civil servants and mission managers become the custodians of this continuity, preserving institutional knowledge across multiple administrations. Their role mirrors that of archivists tending a vast manuscript written by many authors, ensuring the narrative remains comprehensible even when chapters are rewritten. Political leadership may set the immediate tone, but these custodians uphold the long view, guiding programs past the turbulence of short-term priorities. A shift in political winds can sometimes breathe life into dormant ambitions. Projects that languished under one administration may suddenly gain momentum when new leadership arrives with enthusiasm for a different set of goals. This resurrection can be exhilarating, though not without challenges. Teams must rapidly recover shelved documentation, refresh outdated estimates, and reassess whether earlier assumptions still hold. In this sense, political renewal can resemble reopening an archaeological dig site. Excitement mingles with uncertainty, and the work requires equal parts precision and improvisation. The revival of old dreams becomes a reminder that ideas in the aerospace world never truly disappear, they wait for favorable weather. Conversely, political shifts can place thriving programs into quiet jeopardy. A mission that seemed unstoppable can suddenly lose its narrative support if leadership decides its benefits appear intangible or its cost too heavy. The transition may not feel like a dramatic cancellation. It often begins with delayed approvals, softened language in public statements, or subtle reallocation of funds. Such signs are rarely lost on those inside the agency, who must interpret them cautiously and prepare fallback strategies. The emotional aspect is undeniable. Years of work can hinge on decisions made far from laboratories or launch pads, but the institution has grown adept at absorbing these shocks without fracturing. The agency's relationship with political leadership is a study in asymmetry. Elected officials may serve 4- or 8-year terms, while the agency's endeavors routinely span 2 or 3 times that duration. This mismatch means the organization must simultaneously respond to short cycles and maintain programs intended for generations. The resulting tension creates an environment in which storytelling becomes essential. Leaders inside the agency must craft narratives capable of persuading each new administration that the path forward, whether scientific, economic, or symbolic, deserves its sustained attention. The survival of missions often relies as much on narrative clarity as technical precision. International collaboration further complicates the political landscape. Partnerships with other spacefaring nations require long-term commitments, yet the domestic political climate may not always support consistent engagement. A change in leadership can shift diplomatic stances, altering the tone of joint missions or revising agreements previously considered stable. Such uncertainties require delicate handling to avoid fracturing relationships that took years to build. Yet these partnerships remain essential, serving as bridges across political divides and highlighting the shared human desire to explore beyond Earth's boundaries. The political weather may change, but collaboration endures because the cosmos belongs to no single nation. Political weather also influences public engagement strategies. Administrations with a flair for spectacle may encourage bold announcements and high-visibility missions, while more cautious leaders might emphasize modest achievements with practical value. Communication teams must recalibrate their approach depending on which tone aligns with the current moment. This becomes an exercise in rhetorical navigation. Too much ambition might appear unrealistic, but too little can diminish public enthusiasm. The interplay reveals how deeply political context affects not only what the agency does but how it tells its story to the world. The cyclical nature of elections means that political winds often peak during transitions, creating a rhythm of uncertainty. Mission proposals, once confidently presented, must be repitched using updated language. Budgets that seemed locked in may require rejustification. Each cycle teaches the organization to hold its plans loosely, even as it strives to protect the integrity of long-term vision. Adaptability becomes a quiet virtue, not celebrated but essential, allowing complex projects to survive the oscillations of governance. Some administrations champion innovation by promoting private sector partnerships, seeing commercial collaboration as a catalyst for speed and efficiency. Others take a more cautious approach, emphasizing safety, oversight, and the preservation of government control. These differing philosophies can reshape procurement strategies, workforce structures, and technology development timelines. The agency must respond to such shifts without losing its identity or compromising on the rigor required for missions that operate in unforgiving environments. Balancing public and private priorities becomes one more atmospheric variable in the broader political climate. Even scientific advisory councils feel the effects of political weather. Membership changes, shifting mandates, and varying degrees of influence all contribute to fluctuating priorities in research funding. Areas of study that once received enthusiastic support may find themselves marginalized, while previously overlooked fields gain new relevance. Researchers within the agency learn to advocate for their disciplines with a blend of scientific honesty and political savvy, recognizing that the survival of specialized programs sometimes hinges on their ability to communicate value to non-experts holding decision-making power. Political winds also shape the symbolic dimension of spaceflight. Certain leaders emphasize national pride, framing missions as demonstrations of technological supremacy. Others highlight the peaceful, cooperative nature of exploration. These narrative choices influence not only domestic perception but international relations. They determine whether missions are portrayed as competitive feats or shared human endeavors. The agency must adjust its messaging to align with these shifting frames while retaining its own ethos of discovery, ensuring that political tone does not drown out scientific purpose. A change in political weather can alter timelines as dramatically as it changes budgets. Accelerated schedules may be imposed to achieve milestones before the end of an administration, while other missions experience deliberate slowdowns to allow planning for generational endurance. Such alterations challenge engineers, who must recalibrate complex sequences of testing, manufacturing, and integration. Timelines in aerospace are not simple strings that can be tightened or loosened at will. They are webs of interdependent tasks, sensitive to even minor disruptions. Yet the agency continues refining its ability to adjust while preserving mission integrity. As political attention shifts, so do definitions of success. A mission once celebrated for its scientific ambition may be reframed as too costly unless it demonstrates immediate practical benefits. Likewise, a program initially dismissed as narrow may be elevated if it aligns with a broader geopolitical objective. These evolving interpretations require constant assessment within the agency. Success becomes a moving target, shaped as much by political context as by engineering achievement. Navigating this shifting metric demands strategic communication and the ability to articulate value across multiple dimensions. Leadership transitions can produce intense scrutiny of ongoing missions, prompting audits, reviews, and restructuring efforts. While such evaluations sometimes expose areas needing improvement, they can also disrupt momentum or burden teams with additional documentation. Yet these processes have become an expected part of the political weather cycle. They function like atmospheric boundary layers, regions of friction that slow progress temporarily but ultimately help stabilize the system by ensuring transparency and accountability. The relationship between political leadership and long-term planning underscores a fundamental truth: stability must be cultivated rather than assumed. The agency builds strategic frameworks that anticipate variability, layering plans so they can survive partial funding or delayed authorization. This architectural mindset mirrors spacecraft design philosophy, where redundancy and robustness are built into every system. Similarly, political resilience becomes a design principle for the organization itself, allowing it to navigate unpredictable winds without losing direction. Political winds can also alter the emotional landscape within the agency. Teams may experience renewed energy when leadership expresses confidence in their work, or they may feel the weight of uncertainty when signals become ambiguous. Morale matters in fields demanding sustained, meticulous effort. A sense of purpose can propel teams through grueling development cycles, while doubt can erode the cohesion required for complex missions. Leadership changes therefore influence not only policy but the human texture of the organization. Shifts in leadership sometimes bring shifts in risk tolerance. Bold administrations may encourage experimental technologies, while cautious ones emphasize proven methods. This dynamic can reshape research portfolios and determine which ideas receive long-term investment. For innovators within the agency, such shifts feel like changes in gravitational pull, either liberating or constraining, but always influential. Nonetheless, creativity persists, adapting to the prevailing climate by seeking opportunities within the boundaries defined by current leadership. Political weather also affects the visibility of failure. Some administrations treat setbacks as natural steps in scientific progress, promoting transparency and learning. Others fear political repercussions and prefer to minimize public discussion of risk. These differences shape how missions communicate challenges, handle anomalies, and share results. A culture that embraces learning from failure can advance more rapidly, while one that suppresses discussion may struggle with hidden vulnerabilities. The agency must navigate these cultural shifts while maintaining its commitment to rigorous analysis. The influence of political leadership extends into the educational and outreach dimensions of the agency's mission. Administrations that value public engagement may expand programs linking space science to classrooms and communities, while others focus resources inward. These changes affect future generations' relationship with exploration, shaping the pipeline of scientists and engineers who will carry forward missions decades from now. The political climate of the moment subtly shapes the imagination of the future. Ultimately, political weather is neither wholly oppressive nor entirely enabling. It is a dynamic environment through which the agency has learned to navigate with cautious skill. Its unpredictability forces flexibility, creativity, and constant re-evaluation. While it may constrain certain ambitions, it also pushes teams to refine their arguments, sharpen their planning, and cultivate the resilience required for work measured not in election cycles but in decades. The winds of leadership will always shift, but the resolve to explore endures, inviting further reflection on how institutions maintain their course amid ever-changing skies. The soft shift began not with a sudden announcement, but with the gentle hum of new engines, new ideas, and private companies that carried a different kind of urgency. They moved quickly, with leaner structures and sharper ambitions, and their presence in the landscape of space exploration grew quietly at first, like new stars slowly brightening in the periphery of NASA's long-established sky. Their rise wasn't hostile or loud, it was patient, driven by innovation rather than rivalry, and it gradually changed the texture of the space industry in ways that felt subtle yet unmistakable. As private companies matured, their technology became increasingly elegant rockets that landed with soft, precise confidence, spacecraft built with modern materials, and systems optimized for efficiency rather than tradition. NASA watched these developments with a calm but contemplative gaze, recognizing in them both opportunity and shift. The agency had long been the leading voice in space exploration, but now it sensed a new rhythm emerging, one that moved faster, lighter, and with a kind of flexible confidence that public institutions often struggled to match. This shift wasn't a loss of relevance, it was more like handing over certain responsibilities to new hands, allowing NASA to focus on deeper, more complex scientific missions. Yet even so, the presence of these private partners created a soft echo of inevitability, a slow, steady redistribution of capability. NASA had always carried the weight of exploration alone, but now that weight was shared, and although that made missions more achievable, it also signaled a change in identity, a gentle fading at the edges of its once unrivaled domain. The private sector's rapid pace introduced a new tempo to the world of spaceflight. While NASA's processes were deliberate, tested, and careful, private companies took risks, iterated quickly, and embraced failure as a stepping stone rather than a setback. Their rockets flew more often, their prototypes multiplied, and the world grew accustomed to seeing innovation driven not by a government mandate but by the energy of entrepreneurs. This shift, too, was soft, no conflict, no collision, just a gradual normalization of a new era where NASA was no longer the sole conductor of humanity's cosmic dreams. Partnerships between NASA and private firms grew naturally out of this evolving landscape. The agency, wise from decades of experience, saw the value in collaboration. It provided guidance, oversight, and the profound lessons learned from past missions, while the companies offered agility, funding, and fresh creativity. These partnerships formed like gentle bridges, connecting generations of explorers and creating opportunities that neither side could have achieved alone. But with each partnership, NASA stepped back just slightly, allowing room for these younger players to take center stage. In time, private spacecraft carried supplies to orbit with a frequency that once would have been unimaginable. Their boosters descended onto landing pads with calm precision, and space stations that once relied solely on NASA now received visits from commercial capsules whose sleek designs reflected a new aesthetic of exploration. Each success contributed to a quiet redistribution of influence. NASA remained the wise elder, but it was no longer the only architect of the future. The canvas of spaceflight had broadened, and new hands were painting on it with vivid strokes. As technology evolved, so did perceptions. Spaceflight no longer felt like an exclusively governmental endeavor, it began to feel accessible, modern, and even entrepreneurial. The public's imagination shifted gently toward these private ventures, inspired by their bold visions and frequent milestones. NASA continued to earn respect and admiration, but the spotlight no longer rested solely upon it. The attention diffused, spreading across a constellation of new players whose contributions were becoming integral to humanity's growing presence beyond Earth. The private sector's ascent also changed the economics of exploration. Launch costs fell, designs became modular, and competition fostered efficiency. For NASA, this was a blessing. Missions that once took decades of preparation could now be supported with commercial components, making them more feasible and less expensive. And yet, with every cost saved, there was a quiet acknowledgement that NASA was gradually shifting from leading every aspect of spaceflight to guiding, coordinating, and inspiring it. Its role was becoming more strategic than operational, more visionary than mechanical. This gradual handoff was not a surrender but a soft evolution. NASA's strength had always been its long-term thinking, its ability to imagine missions across decades. Private companies thrived on immediacy, iteration, and rapid progress. Together, they created a balanced ecosystem. NASA focused on deep space, science, and discovery, while private firms handled transport, infrastructure, and near-Earth activities. But in that balance lay a whisper of change. The everyday work of spaceflight was transitioning into commercial hands. The quiet takeover of technology felt almost natural because it aligned with the world's broader shift toward privatization and innovation-driven industries. As Earth's technology advanced, the gap between government and private capability narrowed until it nearly disappeared. Companies began building their own telescopes, planning their own lunar missions, and designing habitats meant for worlds NASA had studied for decades. This wasn't competition, it was continuation, a new generation stepping forward into the terrain NASA had mapped. Over time, NASA's reliance on private vehicles became the norm. Astronauts launched aboard commercial rockets, supplies reached orbit through commercial craft, and even lunar plans depended heavily on the machinery of private partners. NASA remained the visionary, the guiding mind, the steward of scientific integrity, but the hands that built and flew much of the hardware increasingly belonged to industry. This shift was gentle yet profound, like passing a torch without ceremony, a quiet acknowledgement that new capabilities had matured enough to share the journey. Private companies also brought new cultures into space exploration, cultures shaped by speed, ambition, and a kind of restless hunger for progress. These cultures mixed with NASA's cautious, research-oriented mindset, creating an interplay that sometimes sparked tension but more often produced innovation. NASA found itself learning from its newer partners, adopting some of their dynamism while offering them wisdom in return. The exchange enriched both, but it also subtly rebalanced the hierarchy of influence in the space domain. The proliferation of private missions filled the skies with a steady cadence of launches, each one reflecting the new normal. The world grew accustomed to frequent liftoffs, to commercial logos on rockets, to announcements of new ventures promising satellites, landers, and even tourism. NASA's launches, once rare and monumental, became part of a wider chorus. The agency still inspired awe, but no longer by default. It now shared the stage, its voice one among many in a growing orchestra of spacefarers. As the years passed, NASA's expertise became most valuable in the realms that required deep patience, interplanetary science, long-term observation, and missions where precision outweighed speed. The agency doubled down on probes, telescopes, and research initiatives that demanded decade-scale planning. Meanwhile, private companies excelled in areas that rewarded rapid iteration. The division was not rigid, but it was clear. Each entity contributed where it could thrive, and together they expanded humanity's reach. Yet in this collaboration, a quiet truth glimmered: NASA was no longer the sole engine of progress. In some ways, this soft takeover liberated the agency. Without the burden of building every rocket or managing every launch, NASA could devote more time to long-range thinking. It could contemplate missions to icy moons, to the outer planets, to asteroids rich with scientific secrets. It could refine its understanding of cosmic origins and guide humanity's knowledge deeper into the universe. The shift did not weaken NASA, it refined it. But refinement often comes with a soft diminuendo, a gentle fading toward a new identity. Still, there lingered a subtle melancholy, a sense that the world no longer looked to NASA with the same singular wonder it once did. The ore had diversified. The inspiration that used to flow toward one source now branched outward, finding new vessels and private companies whose sleek rockets captured public fascination. NASA had not been replaced, but it had been joined, and the joining naturally diluted its solitude in leading humanity into space. As ventures multiplied, private companies began dreaming bigger, talking of cities on Mars, mining operations on asteroids, and grand structures in orbit. They spoke in bold, confident tones, unhindered by the cautious language of government agencies. These dreams echoed loudly through the public imagination, shaping expectations of the future. NASA's dreams were just as profound, but quieter, grounded in science rather than spectacle. The difference made NASA feel older, more contemplative, while the private sector radiated a youthful fearlessness. This cultural contrast created a gentle tension in perception. NASA represented wisdom and caution, the private sector represented daring and speed. Both were necessary, but the world often celebrated speed more visibly. As the private sector soared forward with frequent launches and ambitious announcements, NASA's steady pace felt more subtle, less dramatic, like a soft drumbeat beneath a growing symphony. Its contributions remained vital, but less spotlighted in an era hungry for rapid achievements. The quiet takeover also affected NASA internally. Some within the agency embraced the change, seeing partnership as the future of sustainable exploration. Others felt a soft ache, sensing the gradual shift of roles, the slow redefinition of what it meant to be part of NASA. The halls were still filled with brilliance and dedication, but also with the awareness that NASA was no longer the singular force it once was. Evolution was necessary, but it came with nostalgia, like watching a loved institution step into its elder years with grace. In time, private innovation influenced the very shape of NASA's missions. The agency chose designs compatible with commercial components, crafted strategies that leveraged industry strengths, and depended on external contractors for essential systems. NASA remained the conductor of complex missions, but many of the instruments were now built elsewhere. This was efficient, practical, and even visionary, but it continued the slow drift of operational power from public hands to private ones. The soft takeover also illuminated a philosophical shift. Space was no longer solely a frontier of collective national effort, it was becoming a domain of commerce, enterprise, and investment. NASA watched this transformation with thoughtful detachment, recognizing its inevitability but remaining committed to the deeper scientific and exploratory truths that had always defined its purpose. The agency understood that while companies might seek profit or prestige, NASA sought knowledge, and that purpose held its own quiet dignity. As partnerships deepened, NASA's role as mentor became more pronounced. It offered expertise, standards, and the reliability of decades-long experience, guiding younger organizations through the complexities of cosmic exploration. In return, the private sector offered new techniques, rapid prototyping, and the excitement of modern innovation. This exchange was gentle, respectful, and transformative. Yet beneath it all lay the awareness that NASA was slowly shifting into a supportive role rather than a dominant one. With each passing year, the ecosystem of space exploration became richer, more diverse, and more dynamic. NASA remained an essential pillar, but not the only pillar, and that multiplicity changed the emotional landscape around its missions. They still mattered deeply, but they were no longer solitary beacons in a vast night. They were part of a constellation, beautiful, connected, but not singular. This shared sky was promising, but it softly echoed the truth that NASA's era of unmatched leadership was gradually becoming history. And as the private sector continued to grow, innovate, and expand its reach, NASA found itself in a new phase of its existence, one defined not by dominance, but by wisdom, guidance, collaboration, and reflection. Technology's soft takeover was not a defeat, it was a gentle turning of a page, the natural evolution of a universe that invites many hands to explore it. NASA remained present, steady, and essential, but its spotlight slowly dimmed, not extinguished, but softened, as new lights rose around it, illuminating the future with a wider, shared brilliance. When a NASA mission reaches the twilight of its journey, it rarely feels like an ending in the dramatic sense. Instead, it unfolds like the soft dimming of a lantern that has burned faithfully through long nights, slowly giving way to the natural quiet of completion. These closures are rarely sudden. They come after years of service, data, dedication, and silent companionship between humans on Earth and machines drifting through the vastness. The world may feel the end as a brief headline, but inside NASA, it feels like the final exhale of a long, steady breath held for decades. As a spacecraft ages, its decline resembles the gentle slowing of an old traveler who has walked countless miles and seen sights no human eye has witnessed directly. Instruments lose sensitivity, batteries weaken, components degrade under relentless radiation and cold. But the mission teams treat these signs not as failures, but as tender reminders that even machines have lifespans shaped by the harshness of the cosmos. Plans shift from expanding discoveries to ensuring dignity in the final phase, prolonging every last whisper of data like a cherished conversation. These winding down periods are filled with quiet rituals, engineers running final calibrations, scientists squeezing out last analyses, and mission leads reviewing years of history, reflecting on how this distant envoy changed understanding in ways small and grand. No one rushes these moments. Instead, they linger, savoring the significance of a spacecraft that has become a companion, one that has listened to commands sent across millions or billions of kilometers and responded with unwavering loyalty. The pacing slows, mirroring the fading heartbeat of the mission. Eventually, the commands become fewer, sent with the awareness that each might be the last to reach their destination. The mission control rooms that once buzzed with constant activity grow quieter, illuminated more by memory than urgency. It is in these stages that NASA's teams embrace a kind of serenity, acknowledging that the mission has given everything it could. There is no collapse, no frantic scrambling, only acceptance, patience, and a calm readiness for the moment when the final signal drifts back across space. Even when the last transmission finally arrives, often just a faint pattern of data too weak to form a full message, the moment is received with reverence. Engineers gather not to mourn, but to appreciate the resilience of a machine that lived far beyond expectations. They listen to the silence that follows, a silence not of absence, but of completion. Like watching a star set beyond a distant horizon, the end feels peaceful, natural, as though the mission simply slipped into the deeper currents of the universe. For missions at planetary bodies, the closure sometimes comes in the form of a controlled descent. This descent is gentle, intentional, planned with extreme care to avoid contamination or unintended interference. The spacecraft glides downward like a falling leaf returning to the soil, contributing its final act to science by becoming part of the world it once observed from afar. These carefully choreographed endings feel like a final bow, a respectful farewell to a celestial partner. Other missions drift quietly into interstellar space, like Voyager, where the thinning connection is not an ending but a gradual fading of a voice carried across impossible distances. The winding down of such missions feels almost poetic, like waving goodbye to a ship sailing over a horizon it will never return from. With each passing month, the signal weakens, but the legacy strengthens, as the machines continue onward with no audience except the stars themselves. Inside NASA, teams remain connected long after a mission's final moment. They review archives, publish research, process images, and preserve data for future generations. This continuation softens the ending further, turning what could feel like loss into an ongoing contribution. The completion of a mission becomes a seed for new ideas, new projects, new hopes, transforming closure into a quiet beginning. NASA's culture is built around this gentle cycle. Nothing ends, it simply evolves. The winding down of missions also serves as a reminder of the agency's long timelines. Some missions stretch across entire careers. People grow older alongside the spacecraft they help guide. When closure arrives, it often aligns with retirements, transitions, or new roles, making the moment feel less like an end and more like a chapter turning. The softness of these closures reflects the deep personal connection between humans and the silent explorers they've shepherded. And in moments of closure, the world outside NASA often moves on quickly, unaware of the emotional currents within mission teams. But inside, people linger over the last images, the final graphs, the concluding notes that mark years of effort distilled into a final moment. They speak softly, reflect deeply, remembering the challenges overcome and surprises discovered. These small rituals give weight to the ending, transforming it into something meaningful. For the spacecraft themselves, the universe becomes their resting place, a vast cemetery of silent travelers drifting between worlds. Some remain in stable orbits around planets, their paths predictable and serene. Others sit on distant surfaces, becoming artificial stones in alien landscapes. And some wander through space indefinitely, their instruments long dark, but their journeys continuing. Each carries the quiet memory of human curiosity embedded in its frame. Closing a mission is never wasteful. NASA ensures that every last resource is used, every opportunity seized, every potential discovery captured before powering down. This final phase is not rushed, for there is beauty in completing a journey with care. Even when the spacecraft can no longer respond, the team sends one final message, a goodbye that may travel forever without an ear to hear it. But the act itself matters. It honors the years shared between planet and probe. The gentle closure of missions reveals something profound about NASA's philosophy. It does not treat endings as failures or disappointments, but as natural moments within the cycle of exploration. Each mission is expected to end. The goal is to make that ending meaningful, respectful, and rich with scientific gifts. This attitude contrasts sharply with the dramatic narratives people sometimes expect from space exploration. Instead of explosions or sudden loss, NASA cultivates endings that feel like sunsets, soft, inevitable, beautiful. As new missions rise, older ones retire with grace, creating a rhythm that keeps NASA grounded. This process ensures that no mission overstays its viability, and no legacy is forgotten. The continuity between past and future remains unbroken. Younger engineers learn from older missions, studying their closures to design spacecraft that last longer, perform better, and end more cleanly. Thus, even the final phase of a mission shapes the next generation's journey. Even with budget constraints and shifting political winds, NASA preserves the dignity of mission endings. There is a quiet pride in closing out a project properly, in making sure every line of code and every last measurement serves a purpose. Nothing is abandoned carelessly. The agency treats its spacecraft like partners, honoring the years of cooperation with thorough, thoughtful closure. This unspoken ethic gives NASA its unique character. In some cases, missions wind down because their objectives are completed. The success is so thorough that continuing would offer diminishing returns. These conclusions feel peaceful, almost celebratory. The spacecraft has done what it was meant to do, and more. Mission Control signs off with satisfaction, knowing that the job was completed fully. Such endings are rare gems, pure accomplishment distilled into a moment of gentle farewell. Other missions end because conditions change, fuel runs low, solar panels degrade, or instruments reach their operational limits. Even these practical closures are treated with the same quiet reverence. The teams reflect on how the spacecraft persevered through unpredictable environments, adapting to challenges nature presented. They appreciate the resilience, the endurance, the quiet bravery of a machine holding on until it can give no more. Some missions are ended purposefully to protect worlds like Europa or Enceladus from contamination. These closures carry a special weight, blending scientific caution with deep respect for potential life elsewhere. Ending a mission to safeguard a moon reflects a philosophical maturity, acknowledging that exploration must be conducted with humility. These endings feel protective, almost parental, like tucking the universe into a safe space. Through all of this, NASA never dramatizes an ending. There are no alarms, few hurried commands. The tone is calm, measured, thoughtful. Engineers double-check procedures, scientists review protocols, and communicators prepare brief statements. It is a choreography of closure, performed slowly and deliberately. This rhythm allows everyone to process the moment, accepting it not as failure but as a natural conclusion to a long and meaningful journey. The end of a mission also returns people to themselves. With the constant work of operations winding down, they rediscover their lives outside the mission, families, hobbies, dreams deferred. The closure releases them, not abruptly, but gently, giving them space to breathe again. Many find it bittersweet, relief mixed with longing. But in the quiet after a mission's end, they often feel a deeper appreciation for what they accomplished together. When NASA looks back at its retired missions, it does so with affection. The agency maintains archives, photos, datasets, and documentaries that preserve each mission's story. These memories keep the missions alive long after their signals fade. Future students and scientists revisit them, finding inspiration in their triumphs and lessons in their challenges. In this way, the gentle closure of missions becomes part of NASA's ever-growing legacy. The slow winding down also mirrors NASA itself, an agency that moves with deliberate grace rather than haste. The endings show that even in decline, there is beauty. Even in silence, there is meaning. Even in the final moments of a mission, there is a quiet echo of all that it gave to human understanding. These endings teach that exploration is not only about discovery, but also about acceptance, humility, and gratitude. As the number of active missions eventually shrinks in this imagined future, NASA's twilight feels less like vanishing and more like the soft dimming of constellations as dawn approaches. Each retiring mission becomes a star going out quietly, one by one, leaving behind a sky of memories. The fading is gentle, almost comforting. The world might not notice the moment each star disappears, but the light they gave remains. And so, NASA's missions do not end abruptly, they drift, settle, conclude softly, like ripples smoothing across a still pond. Their closures reflect the agency's character, thoughtful, unhurried, respectful of time and effort. In these quiet endings, we witness something profoundly human, a recognition that all journeys must eventually rest, and that beauty often resides not only in what begins, but in how gently something comes to its close. People first, scientists, engineers, and the human thread. In the quiet heart of NASA's long story, beneath the machinery, beyond the missions, and deeper than the institutional walls, there exists a human thread, a soft, steady current of minds and hands that shaped every triumph and carried every burden. These people, often unseen and seldom celebrated, were the true architects of NASA's legacy. Their presence filled long corridors with hushed conversations, late-night calculations, warm cups of cooling coffee, and the gentle hum of determination that no machine could ever replicate. They were the heartbeat hidden beneath the roar of rockets, grounding the agency in humanity as it reached for the stars. For every spacecraft that left Earth's embrace, there were thousands of people who lent quiet years of their lives to its creation. Scientists traced faint signals across screens deep into the night, following patterns that whispered secrets of distant worlds. Engineers weighed every bolt and every line of code with careful, loving precision, knowing that even the smallest mistake could echo across millions of miles. Administrators, planners, and communicators carried the emotional load of expectation, organizing chaos into clarity so the missions could stay afloat. Each person added a stitch to NASA's tapestry, woven with time, patience, and devotion. These individuals didn't chase glory, they chased understanding. Many worked knowing they might never see the full fruits of their labor, that their contributions might be swallowed quietly by the grand scale of exploration. Yet they continued, moved by something unseen, a sense of belonging to a story larger than themselves. They found comfort in the steady rhythm of collective effort, in the way a team could transform uncertainty into something functional, something promising. In their hands, the cosmos became a conversation rather than a mystery, spoken through equations, instruments, and shared dreams. Inside NASA's laboratories, the air often held a feeling of calm urgency, the soft tension of people trying to solve problems that stretched the limits of imagination. Whiteboards filled slowly with thoughts, diagrams shifted, and theories danced quietly between colleagues who trusted each other's minds. These rooms were not glamorous, but they were sacred spaces where curiosity bloomed in the slow, warm glow of persistence. People who worked there found themselves returning not just for the work, but for the companionship that made every challenge feel lighter. When missions neared completion, teams felt a tender mix of exhaustion and pride. Years of planning condensed into that final stretch, where every detail mattered more than ever. There were quiet nods in hallways, shared snacks at desks, moments when someone would simply sit back and breathe, letting the weight of effort settle. And when launch day finally arrived, the silence between countdown numbers felt like a held breath shared across hundreds of hearts. Success was never owned by one, it rippled through the entire network of people who walked the journey together. NASA's people carried memories not recorded in any archive, the warmth of a colleague bringing breakfast during an overnight shift, the way someone hummed softly while debugging code, the gentle laughter that drifted across workstations when fatigue tried to take over. These subtle moments stitched humans together more tightly than any contract or protocol ever could. They were reminders that behind every technological marvel stood a community, fragile, hopeful, beautifully imperfect. In the control rooms, where screens flickered and missions spoke across the void, people learned to read emotions behind still faces. The smallest quiver of a smile, the faint narrowing of brows, the soft tap of anxious fingers all spoke volumes. These rooms witnessed joy and heartbreak alike. They witnessed the silent tears of relief when signals came through, and the heavier ones when they did not. Through it all, people leaned on each other, sharing burdens that no machine could translate. NASA's engineers often left pieces of themselves in the machines they built. They knew the weight of every screw, the heartbeat of every circuit, the personality quirks of each rover or probe. These machines became more than metal, they became companions, extensions of countless hands and minds. When missions ended, engineers felt the loss deeply, as though saying goodbye to something that had carried a part of their soul into the universe. The grief was quiet, unspoken, but undeniably real. The scientists, too, carried emotional landscapes shaped by discovery and uncertainty. They lived in a world where answers unfolded slowly, like flowers blooming only in moonlight. They learned to delight in partial clues, in data that whispered instead of declared. They found comfort in the long road to truth, even when that road twisted or disappeared into the unknown. Their patience wasn't passive, it was a form of devotion, a practice of waiting with curiosity rather than frustration. Within NASA's culture, mentorship became a cherished thread that passed wisdom from one generation to the next. Seasoned engineers shared stories of past missions, teaching newcomers the subtle art of resilience. Young scientists brought fresh perspectives, reminding their mentors why they had chosen this path in the first place. These relationships formed an interwoven lattice of knowledge and comfort, an inheritance more valuable than any hardware. Together, they ensured that NASA's spirit persisted through changing eras. As the agency faced slowdowns and shifting priorities, its people felt the strain most deeply. They watched projects they loved get paused or diluted, and though disappointment flickered in their eyes, they continued working with grace. Their resilience became a living testimony to NASA's endurance, not just in terms of achievement, but in terms of collective heart. Even when missions faded or funding thinned, the people held on to each other, forming a quiet refuge against uncertainty. When discussions of NASA's potential end surfaced, it wasn't fear of institutional collapse that shook people, it was the potential silence where collaboration once thrived. The idea of empty offices, quiet labs, unused consoles, it stirred something tender and aching inside those who had poured decades into this place. Yet even in imagining such an ending, they approached it with dignity, acknowledging that all things, even beautiful ones, move through cycles. What mattered most was that their work had touched the world. Some employees found themselves contemplating their legacy, not in terms of fame, but impact. They wondered what traces of their efforts would linger in future generations of explorers. They hoped that someone, somewhere, would pick up where they left off, guided by the same longing to understand the universe. This hope softened the edges of uncertainty, turning apprehension into a quiet kind of acceptance. They knew that human curiosity would never fade, even if institutions changed. NASA's people often spoke of time differently. Their work stretched across decades, teaching them to view progress like a long sunset, slow, gentle, beautiful in its unfolding. They knew that a single piece of research might take years before bearing fruit, and they embraced that rhythm with humility. Their sense of time wasn't rushed, it was contemplative, shaped by the pace of stars and orbits rather than the pace of society. Over the years, NASA became a sanctuary for those who felt most alive in the presence of big questions. It attracted minds who saw wonder in the faintest signals, who found poetry in the physics of distant worlds. This sanctuary became a second home, a place where people could share their fascination without restraint. They bonded not just over data, but over the shared feeling of being tiny humans staring into an infinite universe together. The agency's human thread extended across generations of families, too. Some grew up with parents who had worked on missions decades earlier, inheriting stories of launches, failures, repairs, and triumphs. They entered NASA carrying echoes of the past, blending them with their own aspirations. This familial continuation added a softness to the agency's culture, reminding everyone that NASA was not just a workplace, it was a lineage of curiosity. There were moments when individuals questioned whether their efforts truly mattered in the vastness of space. But those doubts were always soothed by the gentle reassurance of colleagues who reminded them that every task, no matter how small, was part of a larger chorus. A screw tightened here, a calculation double-checked there. A line of code refined, each gesture contributed to humanity's ongoing dialogue with the cosmos. People found meaning in this shared purpose, even when the world outside seemed unaware. As technology evolved and responsibilities shifted toward automation, NASA's people remained the irreplaceable core. Machines could calculate faster, build faster, analyze faster, but they could not dream. They could not feel or awe. Ask questions shaped by wonder. They could not stand together in silence, watching a spacecraft disappear into the sky and knowing that part of their heart went with it. NASA's human thread remained essential, even as the tools around it changed. In the later years, as missions slowly wound down and the agency entered a quieter phase, people walked familiar hallways with a sense of nostalgia. Every room held echoes of past laughter, past arguments, past achievements. They found themselves lingering a little longer at their desks, tracing memories across the worn edges of notebooks, old badges, and mission patches. These small artifacts reminded them of the years they had given to something larger than themselves. The gradual slowing of NASA's pace didn't diminish the pride its people felt. If anything, it made them more protective of what remained. They treated ongoing missions with extra tenderness, as though caring for the last embers of a long-burning fire. They supported each other through transitions, offering comfort in quiet words and shared glances. The human thread held firm, even as the structure around it slowly softened. Teams that had once erupted into motion during launches now gathered more slowly, savoring the companionship they had built. They spoke more about memories, about the long nights when they solved impossible problems, about the missions that had changed their lives. These conversations formed a gentle closure, not abrupt, not painful, but filled with gratitude. It was a farewell shaped not by endings, but by appreciation. Even as the agency's future became uncertain, NASA's people carried a deep belief in the continuation of exploration. They understood that curiosity was not bound to institutions. It lived in individuals, in students staring at the night sky, in engineers tinkering in garages, in scientists whose notebooks overflowed with questions. This belief allowed them to release their roles with peace, knowing the human thread would continue beyond NASA's walls. And in this imagined twilight, NASA's true legacy becomes clear. It is not the rockets or the rovers, not the telescopes or the data, but the people, those who dedicated their lives to unraveling the universe with gentle persistence. Their kindness, brilliance, teamwork, and unwavering hope form the lasting imprint of NASA's story. Even if the institution fades, the human thread remains, weaving its way into future dreams, future missions, and future seekers of the stars. As the quiet work of scientists continues behind sealed laboratory doors and softly humming observatories, the act of preserving their discoveries becomes a gentle ritual almost sacred in its stillness. Libraries of digital memory rise like invisible towers, holding images, spectra, faint signals from distant galaxies, and the soft numerical whispers of stars stretching across time. Each file saved, each log carefully indexed, becomes another leaf in an ever-growing cosmic diary. And in that slow, meticulous process, humanity leaves footprints on the endless shore of space, hoping that long after individuals fade, their collected understanding will remain patient, intact, and waiting for someone else to read. In these vast repositories, data does not sleep, it simply rests, floating quietly as if suspended in a timeless dawn. Researchers open archived results like pages from a dream, revisiting moments when a new exoplanet flickered into detection or when a faraway nebula revealed an unexpected curve of gas. The continuity of this information binds generations of scientists together, forming a thread so delicate and yet so resilient that it stretches across decades. And as each generation contributes its own insights to the archive, the thread becomes a soft braid of minds connected beyond time. There is a profound comfort in knowing that the universe keeps its stories, even when we are not looking. Telescopes, spacecraft, and deep space instruments store their observations silently, waiting to be interpreted by minds that may not yet be born. The act of preserving these observations is a gesture of trust, a belief that future beings will care enough to continue decoding the quiet symphony played by galaxies and gravity. It is almost like placing a lantern along a dark path, hoping someone wandering centuries later will see its glow and understand why it was lit. Scholars often say that data is the memory of the cosmos captured in human hands, and in that memory lies a promise that knowledge once illuminated never fully disappears. Even when servers age or systems evolve, the essential fragments are migrated, replicated, and reborn in new formats, the same way stars regenerate elements through time. What once existed in dusty notebooks now thrives in shimmering digital clouds, expanding and adapting like a living organism composed not of cells but of information. In these archives, one can feel the passage of time as clearly as in a whispered story. Millions of lines of code, observational logs, and calibration notes read like journal entries written by machines drifting through the dark. They speak of solar flares caught unexpectedly, passing comets tracked with care, or anomalies that puzzled entire teams. To read them is to listen to the voices of past nights, of researchers working at dawn, of telescopes breathing in starlight while the world slept. Every generation of astronomers builds upon the collected whispers of the previous one. That continuity forms a bridge that never fully stops growing. Students scroll through decades-old measurements, comparing them to freshly captured readings, and in that quiet cross-reference lies a deep sense of harmony. This is how the universe teaches us slowly, patiently, with patterns unfolding like petals over centuries rather than minutes. And the archives preserve each petal, each moment of discovery, with gentle precision. Sometimes the archived data carries mysteries the original observers never recognized. Only years later, with new techniques or better algorithms, someone notices a faint signature hiding at the edge of an old spectrum or a gravitational wobble overlooked in a long-forgotten dataset. The past gently hands its riddles to the future, and in solving them, scientists feel the soft connection to minds who once examined the same numbers under a different sky. The process of preserving knowledge is not only technical, it is deeply human. Behind every dataset lies the dedication of countless individuals who woke early, stayed late, calibrated instruments by hand, and wrote detailed notes so their successors would not be lost. Their care becomes a lingering warmth within the archives, a silent echo reminding future researchers that they are not wandering alone. They are part of a lineage, a shared journey across the unknown. The archives grow like a galaxy themselves, slowly spiraling outward, collecting new stars of information with each orbit of time. What begins as raw data evolves into curated collections, annotated explanations, and carefully linked references. Over the years, these collections become a quiet map of our expanding understanding, showing how humanity slowly traced the contours of the universe, one observation at a time. There is something dreamlike about scrolling through scans of old sky plates, each tiny white dot representing a star whose light traveled for ages before settling on a fragile piece of glass. Those stars still exist, still shine, but the plate captures a moment long gone. Preserving such images feels like protecting fireflies in a jar, not to confine them, but to remember their glow exactly as it was. And in that memory lies a tenderness that transcends science. As technology evolves, preservation becomes both easier and more delicate. Massive servers hum in climate-controlled rooms, mirrored across continents to protect against loss. Yet with every upgrade, every shift in format, researchers must gently lift the data from one era and carry it into the next, like moving a precious manuscript from an old shelf to a new library. It requires patience, foresight, and a deep respect for the work of those who came before. In this slow migration from medium to medium, one can sense the breathing of time. Files travel from tape to disk to cloud, cloud to systems not yet imagined. But their meaning, the quiet story of the universe, remains unchanged, just as starlight remains constant even when refracted through multiple layers of atmosphere. Shared knowledge is the soft thread that binds humanity's curiosity into a collective mind. What one observer notes, another interprets. What one generation their eyes, another tests. The archives make this possible, transforming isolated observations into a grand, interwoven tapestry. Without them, discoveries would flicker briefly and vanish like sparks in the night. With them, each spark becomes part of a constellation of understanding. There is a serene poetry in the idea that future astronomers may study data collected today by instruments that will no longer exist. They will open files created by machines long dismantled, read logs typed by hands long still, and yet feel a subtle companionship, a shared wonder stretching across decades. The archives enable this conversation through time, quiet and unbroken. Sometimes, the data preserved is incomplete, carrying gaps or uncertainties that earlier tools could not resolve. Yet even these imperfections are valuable markers of the technological boundaries of their era. They remind future scientists how understanding grows, not in leaps alone but in careful, incremental steps. They are the shadows that give shape to the evolving picture. The gentle pulse of archived knowledge resonates through universities, research centers, and open access platforms around the world. Students far away from observatories can explore cosmic mysteries through these digital windows, feeling connected to a universe they may never witness directly. The archives expand not only understanding but participation, allowing curiosity to flow freely across borders and backgrounds. In the dim lighting of late-night study rooms, one can imagine researchers quietly navigating old datasets, uncovering patterns that feel like messages from another age. Their concentration forms a silent bridge between the living and the remembered, and in that bridge lies a rare sense of continuity, the feeling that discovery is a shared, timeless effort. Even the smallest dataset, just a few lines of numbers, can hold immense meaning when viewed through the lens of new theories. What once appeared insignificant may later become evidence of a hidden phenomenon, a missing detail finally recognized. The archives allow these small fragments to wait patiently, offering their secrets only when the time is right. The act of documenting knowledge also preserves the emotional landscape of exploration. Notes describing excitement, confusion, minor setbacks, or sudden breakthroughs become subtle footprints of the human spirit wandering through the cosmos. These traces remind us that discovery is not cold or mechanical, it is filled with sighs, hopes, uncertainties, and quiet triumphs. Sometimes, entire missions survive only in the form of archived telemetry, their hardware long gone, their instruments silent. Yet their memory lives among the data they gathered, still studied decades after the spacecraft's last transmission. It is as if their voices continue whispering from the past, carried forward by the dedication of those who preserve their legacy. Shared knowledge also safeguards humanity's resilience. Should tools fail or setbacks arise, the archives offer a steady foundation for rebuilding, reconsidering, and moving forward. They keep lessons learned, both successes and mistakes, so that future explorers can walk more confidently into the unknown. As the digital universe of stored data grows, so does the responsibility to maintain it. Curators, engineers, and archivists become quiet guardians of humanity's cosmic memory. Their work may not be visible to most, but without their careful attention, entire chapters of discovery could dissolve into silence. In their hands, science finds its steady heartbeat. There is a strange comfort in imagining these vast repositories existing even when all is quiet, servers humming softly in dark rooms, holding galaxies of numbers that describe real galaxies far beyond sight. They wait like lanterns in the night, their glow unseen but persistent, ready to guide future minds when called upon. Modern tools for analysis, powered by algorithms and deep learning, breathe new life into old data. They reveal patterns humans might have missed, connecting distant pieces into a clearer whole. This blending of past information and present technology creates a tranquil sense of unity, a gentle reminder that knowledge evolves continuously, never truly isolated to one moment. The archives also hold the stories of collaboration, international teams working across time zones, sharing files, discussing interpretations, and building consensus. These shared efforts form a soft lattice of trust and cooperation, proving that understanding the universe is far too vast a task for any one person or nation to shoulder alone. In this quiet dance of preservation, the universe feels closer, as if leaning gently toward humanity in appreciation of the care taken to record its complexities. And in return, researchers feel a growing responsibility to continue listening, observing, and storing its messages with humility. Even when instruments retire, when observatories dim their lights, or when missions conclude, their stories linger within the archives, still alive, still relevant, still whispering. A mission's end never means the end of its impact. Its memory remains a glowing ember, gently warming the hands of those who seek knowledge in the dark. The peaceful continuity of preserved knowledge allows future generations to dream further, question deeper, and reach farther. They inherit not just information but the quiet determination of everyone who contributed before them. In this way, the archives are less a storage system and more a shared consciousness, a collective mind always unfolding. And so, the story of the universe does not fade with time, it becomes richer, layered with interpretations and insights added like soft brushstrokes over centuries. Each archived detail, each preserved observation, becomes part of a slow, soothing chronicle that stretches through ages, inviting anyone who listens to drift gently into its endless, starlit calm.